Welcome back to The Truth About Local Government. I am really, really grateful for our guests today, Gemma Platt and Matt Gofton, who I'll introduce properly in a second. But viewer discretion is advised. This topic we're talking about today is mental health related, and it is aimed at supporting those who are working in local government and broader than that. But the topic could be uncomfortable for some listeners. So please do, if you are affected, reach out to a number of different contacts, which I'll put on the episode to do with mental health support. But today, Healing Tracks, Navigating Mental Health at Work with Gemma Platt and Matt Gofton. Now, before I introduce them and say thank you for coming on, I'm going to give a bit of background context as to what we're talking about today. So Gemma is currently the head of HR for C2C. That's a passenger rail company based in the Southeast. She has 14 years rail experience and spent the last 5 years heavily involved in mental health activity in the industry and the business, which has been largely driven by the loss of her husband to suicide in 2019. Matt Gofton, who works at CIPD in the employee engagement team, worked alongside Gemma's husband at the CIPD, and he too experienced the loss, grief, and inevitable questions that come after you lose someone to suicide. So my two guests today are both passionate about mental health and are passionate about bringing James's story and their own experiences on his loss to an audience in the hope that it helps other people reflect and better understand why starting mental health discussions are really so important about grief, stress, depression, and why it's worth investing time if you are a leader in providing meaningful mental health support in business. Now, I must admit that introduction was not written by me. That was was written by Gemma. But Gemma, firstly, and Matt, thank you so much for coming on and for kind of doing this with us. How are you today?
Good. Thank you for asking, Matt. Yeah, really good.
Doing very well. All the better for being part of this.
Amazing. So, Gemma, I'm going to come to you first. How did you get into mental health?
Yeah, so as you've alluded to, so my journey with mental health really started about 5 years ago. I've got 18 years experience in HR and I guess I've always been interested in mental health because I'm naturally quite a compassionate person. But yeah, when I lost my husband in 2019, 5 years ago, that's when my journey with mental health took a different steer. And I mean, the loss of James, my husband, was a huge shock, as you could understand, and it honestly put me on a quest to try and get answers. I started to sign myself up for webinars, understanding from different perspectives why someone might take the route that my husband took. I remember going to workshops with Mind and railway industry mental health sessions, and yeah, my quest was for answers at the time. Didn't really think at the time that work would then lead on to projects that I could bring to the business that I worked at the time, which was GB Rail Freight. And yeah, I started, it was literally before the funeral, actually. I started to connect with people in the industry and talk about mental health and realise that the company I worked for was so far behind with the offerings of sort of giving staff that support if they had a crisis or if they needed help emotionally. And having those conversations then enabled me to bring in mental health champions at GB Rail Freight. And it was amazing, really, because, yeah, I looked for some volunteers that would be passionate about being mental health champions at the time at the company. And I thought maybe I'll get 5 or 6 people that maybe just feel sorry for the situation that my husband had faced and I'd found myself in as, you know, a grieving widow. And I thought I'd just, you know, maybe get a few volunteers passionate about this. But to my absolute amazement, I ended up with 50 people at the time, and that then subsequently grew, that were so interested in doing more and enabling conversations in the workplace and supporting people. And it was like I unlocked this secret community where people had either had their own mental health challenges, felt suicidal thoughts in the past, or had lost people to suicide, as I had. And I can't tell you how powerful that group were. And it's the project that I'm most proud of. And it was a huge legacy piece for me. For James, it kept his memory alive. It helped me in so many ways to focus on that and to understand more about mental health. But the proof of that success and the impact of that group was felt literally a year to the day of James's death. And now I shared this with you recently, Matt, that one of my champions actually come forward and told me, without knowing it was the anniversary, that he'd been able to talk someone down from a railway platform using the skills that he had got from his mental health champion training. He'd been able to talk someone down from the platform who was considering ending their life, and he managed to call the British Transport Police and help that person. So for me, it was absolutely clear, after that this was so important. This actually did save lives, and it was an amazing thing to be a part of. But yeah, sorry, that was a very long answer to a very quick question.
And I think your husband would be so proud of the work that you're doing, because I think it's so important. I myself, I didn't get diagnosed till I was quite late into my 20s with OCD, and I'd had kind of suicidal kind of thoughts and moments, and I hid a lot of that. But I think the work that you do is so brilliant, because it brings people out of the kind of isolation that they kind of find themselves in. Matt, from your experience and your journey into mental health, how did you first get into this topic, and how has it evolved for you?
Yeah, looking back on it, I feel a little bit embarrassed, because I was aware of mental health, but it wasn't really anything that I'd considered seriously. And I think with everybody, there's significant landmarks in your life that really make an impact and make a mark on you. And unfortunately, James's passing was that mark for me. I'd known James before CIPD for a long time. It must have been about 15 years or so in total. And if anyone's had the pleasure to ever have met James, he was just the most beautiful, kind and generous person. And I thought I really knew him. And if you'd ever met James, he would possibly be one of the last people that you would put on the spectrum of the probability of committing suicide. And therefore, it made me really reflect, like, actually, this is a topic I need to take seriously, Matt. I need to be more considerate and aware of others around me. By no means am I an expert on mental health, but I think it's really important within the world of work to be there for each other, make sure that door is open, and just check in and make sure people are okay. And don't underestimate the impact of your actions. So Gemma, that story with the gentleman on the railway, what a fantastic story that is. But there's probably many other stories that Gemma and I are not aware of that have helped reduce the risk of suicide happening. So that's kind of my avenue into it.
In terms of that kind of emotional journey, Gemma, in terms of taking the time out to begin to process, like, imagine it was a state of shock to begin with, and that journey doesn't just suddenly just start, etc. But what was the kind of emotions did you feel at the time of James's of loss, and kind of that processing, coming back to work after losing him, and engaging with your colleagues? Because there is, I guess, when I was talking to, I've had quite a few listeners who I've been speaking to, and this episode for them is really important. They're really interested in it. But there's a huge amount of, what do you say? What don't you say? How do you help?
Yeah, no, and yeah, you've summed it up. The shock was the biggest emotion I felt, and I was running on autopilot. I think initially it did help me get through those initial weeks, but shock, it's like that grief journey and the cycle. You go through the sadness, the anger, the confusion, and yeah, you do eventually come out of it. I know it sounds like a cliche, but yeah, you do eventually heal in time. But in terms of coming back to work, so I was lucky that I had a good support around me with my then manager and my immediate team, but a lot of people knew what happened at the workplace, and I was quite open about it because I didn't want anyone to catch me off guard. A lot of people had met James at the company I'd worked at, so coming back was hard because I felt like there were some people that would just naturally come up to me and say, "Look, I hope you're okay," or give me a hug. And that was the best thing they could have done, just to break that ice and that awkwardness. But there's some people that clearly knew that something awful and tragic had happened to James and the effect it would have on me. And they clearly just didn't know what to say. So they avoided me, avoided eye contact, didn't come to me with work issues, when all I wanted was to get back to some normality. So that was hard. And that was really felt on the peripherals of the company, really, the people that necessarily didn't necessarily know me very well. So my recommendation for anyone that's going through this is just to say, give a gesture when someone's come back after a long time off through grief or any kind of trauma, just to text sometimes, just to say, are you okay? I'm so sorry for your loss, because you're not going to offend the person, just to break that ice, let them know you care. And then that enables the person going through the trauma to make that contact and say, thank you for your text, and break that awkwardness. But grief is very isolating, and everyone will go through it. We all know that. Everyone will have an experience loss in, some way, shape or form in their life. So it can be very isolating. And I just wish, for me coming back, that there was a network available to me like the Wellbeing Champions at the time. Because, I did feel on my own. It was only when I asked for the volunteers to come forward that I felt that connection with people, which is so important in the workplace.
Matt, for yourself and kind of the journey, as I appreciate James was a good friend of yours, but also as a colleague, what advice would you give to employers that you've kind of learned through your lived experience about how you would support a colleague going through grief?
Gosh, yeah. I think the main thing is make sure that you're present and that you are there. As a group within the team, James is my manager, but within the team, we're also a very close bunch as well. And, we all had our own coping mechanisms for what was, and Gemma's absolutely right, shock, of how to deal with it. For myself, this is really hard to say, but I felt a great degree of guilt when I first heard. And the reason that I felt a great degree of guilt is because I remember explicitly speaking to him on a Friday afternoon, just before I was about to go on holiday, and he just sounded different. And I can remember it still clear to this day. Right at the end of the call, I just said, James, are you okay? Are you okay? And he said, yeah, I'm absolutely fine. And I think there's a process. Gemma will probably know more than me, but ask, are you okay? Are you okay? Are you really okay? And I just wish I'd had that moment just to dive into that a little bit deeper. And I had at first a real tough time getting over that guilt. What really helped me, though, was my colleagues, my peers being there. And actually, Gemma came to one of our Employer Solutions meeting and came and talked about her experiences. It was an incredibly inspirational and strong, powerful thing to do in that position. And unselfishly, it really gave us closure. So I think, the point that I would come to is, don't bottle things up, be open, have those conversations. We all have different ways of dealing with grief, and find, what works for you, and just be open to discussing them.
So, Gemma, for yourself, when did you feel that you knew you'd moved through the most difficult part of your grief journey? And did that have complex kind of emotional connections to it, in that, we talked there about having both loss and guilt as part, all these competing emotions that are going through. What was that like for you, and when did you know that you kind of gone through the worst of it?
Yeah, I mean, the guilt thing is something I've not felt, I think, because, whilst there was an absolute shock about the passing of James, I did see his mental health deteriorate in 3 short weeks before his death. He had no mental health issues before then. For me and his family, especially his mum, who was just the sweetest woman, we really did everything we could when we saw that James wasn't himself. And, we took him to the doctors countless times. We took him to get CBT and counselling and antidepressants, but nothing would help and fix it fast enough. And it, despite us asking the question that is so hard to ask, are you thinking of ending your life? Because he was low, we could see this. He reassured me and his mum separately that he wouldn't. And you know, you take that on face value. But I don't carry the guilt because I know he wouldn't want me to. And I know that's really powerful, but it's almost like my brain telling me I'm not to do that. You know, that he was in pain. I have to look at this as an illness that it is. And he'd lost his mind, and I'd witnessed that, and as had his family, and he had lost his mind, and it ended very tragically. And I don't think there is anything any of us could have done to have stopped that. I'll ask myself why it happened, but I won't carry the guilt, because it's, as Matt said, James was just the nicest person in the world, so genuine, so thoughtful, so loving, and he would just be devastated if me or anyone carried any guilt. It's not in his nature to want us to carry that. So I stopped myself from having that emotion, and but I certainly had the others in terms of shock and sadness and confusion. But sorry, Matt, what was the second part of your question?
No, do you know what? No, it's actually really moved on to a point which I want to focus on here is that there is a positivity that yourself, Gemma, and Matt, also the amazing work the CIPD does, but also the amazing work that you've been leading on at your company, C2C, and actually you're creating a legacy for James with the positive actions that you're creating. So, you know, how do you approach the present, kind of view your future, knowing that this will always be a part of your past?
Yeah, I look at the future with a lot more gratitude about life in itself. You know, I know I still obviously miss James immensely, and I remember the second part of your question. Now, you said, when did it kind of hit me, about when did I get over the worst part of the grief? I would say it took probably the last year for me to really move forward, and accept that what has happened, and I am okay, and I deserve to live a happy life and try and do things that make me happy. I'm really trying to focus on that, build self-care time into my life. I've just come back from an amazing retreat, a wellness retreat, which I would never ever have done, you know, 6 years ago, or I would have thought, no, that's not me. But it's been amazing. It was the second retreat I'd done. I'd done one in India last year, and it helped me come to terms with things. It gave me that time to process everything properly, to be around a network of people that had losses or had difficulties, whether it's through illness or things, be around a community of new people that just support one another, encourage one another to be grateful for things. And I really found that powerful. And yeah, I think the focus on just knowing that the work I'm doing is helping people, is helping me. It's given me a bit of closure. And I look at the future, you know, and it's right. I do think I'm in a good place. I've got, you know, so much to be thankful for. I've got amazing connections with James's family. You know, I talk to them all the time. I was out with his sister yesterday. We just are so kind of focused on keeping that little bubble together and keeping James's memory alive, and we do that at every opportunity we can. And yeah, I think even though he's passed, he's still very much part of our lives, and he's the main source of motivation for everything I do around mental health, of course, but the other decisions I make. And yeah, I look at life now thinking I'm okay to talk about this. I can talk about James's story, and I just hope that it makes people think about having those conversations that you mentioned there, Matt, and makes people reach out. And yeah, even if you feel uncomfortable, just know if your intention is always good and it comes from the right place, and you care about that person, then it's only going to be received with, you know, with gratitude. So just keep those conversations going.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
there was a saying. I just wanted to jump in because it's reminded me of something. There's a saying that James used to say all the time, which was positive vibes. He always used to say, yeah, positive vibes. Got really positive vibes about it. I think that just sums him up perfectly. But also how to reflect on things, right? So I went on holiday on the Saturday, and I remember it crystal clear. We always stop at Cornwall Services in the motorhome, and I was in the car park, and my manager, Adam, rang me and broke the news to me. And I can just remember being in that car park, like, just couldn't absorb it, couldn't compute it. And it was just a really tough time then. I still go on holiday. I still stop at Cornwall Services, and every time I stop at Cornwall Services, I go in the same car park and I take myself into the corner on the grass verge, and I think about positive vibes of like just James and the memories and how to develop, and that in a way is my own personal coping mechanism, and it's that just sums James up in a nutshell. Like Gemma said, he wouldn't want you to feel guilt, he wouldn't want remorse, he wouldn't want sorrow. You'd want positive vibes, and that's what I apply every time I stop in that car park.
No, I love that, and again, what an amazing person. So this is the last question, and it's for those listeners at home, because I know we've covered a lot here, guys, and it's been a heavy topic, but some fantastic things to think about. I would like you to come up with 2 things, Gemma, and 2 things, Matt, that you would like businesses in the UK to do to best support their staff with their mental health. The 2 strategies you think have the most impact. I'm going to start with Matt, because Matt, you're going first, Matt. So there we are. Gemma's gone first all time today. So Matt, what are your 2 strategies, your 2 bits of advice for those listening who have management responsibilities as to how they can promote mental health of their staff?
I think mental health needs to be put in as a golden thread throughout all streams of the world of work. So EDI, well-being, mental health and awareness. But we've also got to make sure that we're not neglecting the capability of those people managers. Typically, these are tough conversations to have on really emotional and sensitive subjects, and therefore we can't just expect people managers to go, right, you've got to focus on mental health, off you go, speak to your team about it. We've got to equip them with the tools, the knowledge, the understanding, the emotional intelligence to how to handle those conversations openly. So to be able to deal with it with confidence, because if they're not confident in something, which is a sensitive area, and it's an area that you don't want to get wrong, right? So we've got to make sure that we're giving the right level of help and support to people managers to make sure that they're there. We need to make sure that mental health is woven through as a golden thread throughout all streams of work. That would be my biggest recommendations to organisations.
Amazing. Gemma, what's your... We're going to go for 1. The one, because that was just too good, Matt. We're going to just stick with 1. What's your 1 thing, Gemma, you would like to see employers do to support the mental health of their employees?
Yeah, and what Matt said is absolutely key. I completely endorse what you've just said. I think the other things are things around, get people connected through their shared lived experiences. That talking is the answer to combat and a lot of this, that mental health struggle that people are facing at the moment. So get people connected through wellbeing champions or mental health first aiders. And also, as a manager, appreciate everyone is different and everyone will struggle. If we're talking about grief in isolation, people might struggle immediately and need 6 months off, and that's okay. Some people will need to come back to work, feel that sense of purpose, be distracted, but it could catch up with them in 6 months, 2 years. So as a manager, just be mindful that everyone is different and build in those checking in points, throughout someone's grief journey, just to make sure they are okay. And something I experienced and have seen time and time again is through my journey is around, I'd neglected my mental health. It got to the 2-year point and I suddenly started to feel physically really ill and faint and thought I was going to die. And I wasn't listening to my body. I was masking everything that was going on up here. And I went to the doctors thinking, I'm really unwell, do blood tests, I'm literally feeling like I'm dying. And they did the blood test. They asked me to come back and they said, look, there's nothing wrong. We think you're stressed. And they, they said, have you considered taking antidepressants? And I hadn't. And I'm sitting there at work and in my own time preaching about looking after your mental health. I wasn't listening to my own advice. So it took 2 years for me to then sort of say, no, I need antidepressants. And actually, I'm very open about the fact that I'm on them. I've been on them for 3 years and they help stabilize my emotions, and all my physical symptoms have disappeared. It almost happened, 2-3 weeks after taking it. And I just hadn't connected the fact that my internal emotional trauma was impacting me physically. And I've seen that happen so often in the workplace where people are neglecting that, and it's coming back to bite them and manifesting itself in physical form down the line. So being in tune with that as a manager as well, and as anyone that has gone through grief, is really, really important.
Gemma, thank you for that. Matt, thank you. And thank you for your time. That's the end of our episode today and looking at how we can navigate mental health at work. So I just want to say, firstly, thank you both for coming on. That was incredibly, I just really appreciate you guys opening up about such a difficult topic. And I hope that, so thank you firstly. We'll start with thank yous.
No, thank you for asking. And yeah, what a great time to do a session like this for Mental Health Awareness Day tomorrow.
Absolute privilege to be invited, and hopefully some of the commentary that Gemma and you've had, Matt, might help somebody out there. Always feel free to reach out to myself. I'm sure Gemma's got an open door just as much as yourself as well, Matt.
Absolutely. And guys, if you're listening to this, remember what has been discussed, but also link out to the work that the CIPD are doing. They're doing amazing work, and also follow Gemma on LinkedIn. She's some amazing stuff. But from us here at The Truth About Local Government, it's goodbye for now. And remember, look after yourself. You've only got one self. Goodbye.